Welcome to the CouchScouts podcast. We provide league-winning analysis, advice, and tools to help you dominate your league and build a dynasty. Scout, draft, win. Here's your host, Matt Cooper.
Welcome to the CouchScouts podcast. We are excited to have you here, and I am here. My name is Matt Cooper. I'm your host. With me is my co-host, Matt Jackson.
What's going on?
And no Matt Rupert this week. Unfortunately, he is recovering from surgery, so prayers up for Matt Rupert. Well, tonight's show, we are going to be continuing our Intro to Dynasty series. So if you missed it, last week we kicked off the series with an episode on basically how to set up a dynasty league. We went through settings and rules and just things to consider, whether you're a new player trying to start a league for the first time, and a lot of the pitfalls that you could fall into, and or if you're an experienced player. I think there's things that you could glean from maybe rules that your league should consider adopting. So go back and check that out. But tonight, we're going to be talking about startup draft strategies. So what's the first thing that happens once you finally got your league set up and you got your bylaws and the whole thing? It's the startup draft. And this can obviously really make or break you, because unlike a traditional fantasy football league, the team that you draft in this startup draft, you keep indefinitely. And so you need to do it well. It's a huge part of your dynasty league. So we're going to be discussing everything that you need to consider, different strategies, tips, all that kind of stuff. But before we get into that, wanted to make a couple quick announcements. So one is our website. It's not live yet. Want to keep getting it on y'all's radar to look out for. When the football season starts, we're launching that thing. And you can sign up, get various packages, membership packages with bonus content that from a film room to our rookie guide when that comes out, to extra podcast episodes, all kind of stuff. We're going to do everything we can to make that bang for your buck, worth every penny. One of those perks of being a member would be discount on our merch. So if you're watching us on the YouTube channel, you may see Jackson's wearing his shirt again. I'm rocking the hat. Got my new hat. So, yeah, we're going to be selling merch, and you can buy that whether you have a membership or not. But one of our subscription services is definitely going to include discounts on merch. So anyway, be on the lookout. We're really excited to launch our CouchScouts website in the fall. But let's get into the episode, man. So the first half of tonight's show, we're basically just going to be talking about general tips, things that people should be considering and thinking about as they are in a dynasty startup draft. And then the second half of the show, we'll get into more of the strategies. So Jackson, what's your first tip that you would give to a new dynasty player in their first startup draft?
Yes, if you're a new dynasty player in a startup draft, I think one of the most important tips that we can give you is to know your league settings. It's probably one of the most important things you can do before entering a new league is to know what settings your league is using. Are you playing in a 1 QB league, or are you playing in a super flex league where you can start 2 quarterbacks? If you're playing in a super flex league, that's going to dictate where these quarterbacks go, because these guys are going to get drafted higher. So you're going to want to look to draft these guys. If you're in a super flex league, in rounds 1 to 3, you're going to want to come out of there with at least 1 quarterback, if not 2. If it's a tight end premium league, you got to draft a tight end early if you want those premium points. Or is it a running back getting points per carry, per first down? I mean, it's important to know these league settings, because that's going to dictate, 1, where these guys go, and 2, how you construct your roster through the end of the draft. So that's probably the most important tip that I can give you. But we got several more. Cooper, what's a tip that you have for them?
Yeah, so that one obviously not specific to Dynasty. You need to know your league settings no matter what format you're playing in, redraft, whatever. This one is more Dynasty specific. So my tip is you have to consider age. And that may seem obvious, like, okay, it's a Dynasty league. You need to consider age. If you draft a bunch of old guys, your team might suck next year, and it might take you a long time to fix it. But for a new player, that might not be the most obvious thing in the world. I actually remember my very first Dynasty startup playing in a home league. One of the guys drafted DeMarco Murray the year before he retired, and he spent a pretty high pick on him, and his team was okay in that first year. But then the guy retired, and that's you don't want to spend a high pick on a guy that might retire the following season in a dynasty league. That's not going to set you up very well for the long term. So specifically, I think it's important to know the positional career arcs. And what I mean by that is every position has its different kind of age that those players usually hit their prime and age that they usually start to decline and see their dynasty value decline. And so, for example, 26 is relatively young for a wide receiver. 26 is getting on the older side for a running back. So usually a running back has like a 3 to 5 year prime and 5 to 6 years shelf life at max. But a wide receiver, they could be playing on your team for a decade and they could have a prime that lasts 6 to 8 years. Right. And so quarterbacks, they last a lot longer. Tight ends, typically at least till 30. So just knowing the age cliff, so to speak. So wide receiver 30 is probably the cliff as far as production goes. But 28 is when people start to know that the cliff is coming. And so the dynasty value usually starts to decline around age 28. Running backs, 27's the cliff for production. So 26 is usually when people start to view them as old, and so on and so forth. So anyway, I think that's really important to know and to consider as you are navigating your dynasty startup draft.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great tip, especially when you look at some of these positions. I think a tight end, right? Where, I mean, those guys don't really hit their prime until they've been in the league for 3 or 4 years. So a general player that's new to dynasty and might not know, hey, why isn't this guy producing? Let me get him off my roster. Where tight ends take time to develop. So it's important to know some of these things, right?
Yeah, and that comes with experience, but we want to help you out so that you start your dynasty experience off on the right foot and not the wrong one where you're like, man, why did I draft this guy that retired the year after I started the draft? So, what's your next tip for him, Jackson?
Yeah. So my next tip, something that we hear in a community a lot, but it's this idea of draft for value, not for not for need. There's an approach out there called drafting the best player available, BPA. That's what we're talking about here, right? When you look at the value, who you're drafting in these startup drafts, a lot of guys will try to go, well, I don't have a wide receiver 2 on my roster yet. So I'm going to reach for a guy that maybe I can get 2, 3, maybe even 4 rounds later. Now, what you always want to make sure that you're doing, especially in these startup draft, is drafting for value. Take the very best player on the board that's available to you, because you know what, later on down the road, you can trade that guy for something more, for what you need and even more on top of that. You always want to make sure that you're drafting best player available. Don't reach on guys just because you need that position filled. That's how you can get yourself in a ton of trouble. That's how you can end up grabbing somebody that you could have grabbed 4, 5, 6 rounds later, and people are laughing at you in the chat for it, right? You want to avoid doing some of that.
That's right. And what the reason that we say that, if this is your first time in a dynasty league, and you're used to playing regular redraft fantasy football where you redraft your team every year, you might be used to like not a lot of trades happen in a regular redraft league, right? Because everybody's trying to compete. And so why would I help you get better? And there's no future picks involved. There's no long-term thinking. It's just this year. And so if that's the case, then of course, like when I'm in my draft, I got to fill out my roster. It doesn't matter. Like if I don't have a running back yet, I need to grab a running back. But in a dynasty league, there's way more trading that happens because you can trade future picks. There's people that are trying to contend, people that are trying to rebuild and trade away their assets for picks. And so there's just a natural market that happens in a dynasty league. And so there's much more opportunity if you draft for value and the best player available to then trade later. So, for example, let's say it's a super flex league and you took quarterbacks round 1 and 2, and you've got 2 really solid starting quarterbacks, and it comes around to you at your 3rd round pick. And let's say wow, somehow Justin Herbert fell to me in the 3rd round. Like, that's incredible value, but I've already got 2 quarterbacks. And, I'm starting to feel like I really need to get my first running back or wide receiver. And maybe the best one available at that point in round 3 is, let's say it's like a Chris Olave. I don't know. It's not terrible value, but like Justin Herbert, he's a much more valuable player than Chris Olave, right?
Mhm.
Like after the draft, if you scoop up Justin Herbert, you got 3 quarterbacks. Somebody else needs one, and they're going to be coming to you, and you're going to be able to get probably a much better wide receiver than Olave, or Olave and a 1st round pick or something. It's like take the value, make the trade later. And in a dynasty league, that is typically going to work out a lot better for you.
Yeah, I mean, if you end up drafting 3 or 4 quarterbacks, like guess what? Now you control the market on quarterbacks, and you determine what their price is, and that's what you want, especially in the trade market. But moving on, what's your next tip, Cooper?
Yeah, so I would just say stay flexible. I mean, we're going to talk about strategies in a minute. Like, do you want to come in planning to do a contender build? Or are you going to come in planning to do kind of a 1st-year punt? Um, are you planning on going 0 running back or hero running back or whatever? Um, when you come in with a plan and then the board falls a different way, you got to be willing to adjust. It's like Mike Tyson said, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the mouth, right? So you're like, you come into it going, okay, I'm definitely going to take 2 quarterbacks, my first 2 picks, because it's super flex. Well, what if everybody else has the same plan? And by the time it gets to you, you're like reaching on a quarterback that you don't feel good about with your 1st round pick. Like, don't do that. Pick a player that you feel great about. Get an elite dynasty asset with your 1st round pick and adjust. So or let's say you come in, you say, okay, I'm leaning more towards kind of a rebuild or 1st-year punt, which we'll talk about more what that means in a minute. And you get to round 4 and somehow Christian McCaffrey's still on the board because everybody else is trying to do that same let's go young, let's go young. And so there's this huge value on an older player. You're like, okay, well, I just drafted Christian McCaffrey. I guess I've got a contender build now.
Mhm.
You got to be willing to adjust. You got to stay flexible. Be like water. So that's my last
Yeah.
tip.
I think about it like you're sitting there at pick 111, right? And you're like, I'm going to draft a quarterback. It doesn't matter what happens. And there's a massive like 8 or 9 run on quarterback, right? And you're sitting at 111, and for some reason Justin Jefferson is sitting there.
Right.
Like that's what we're talking about, right? It's the best player available. You take Justin Jefferson, and guess what? You got one of the best wide receivers in the league now. Like you've got to be flexible for sure.
That's right. So the second half of our episode here, we're going to be talking about startup draft strategies. So I kind of just hinted at it. We're going to be going over a contender / win now strategy, the pros and cons, the pitfalls. We're going to be talking about 1st-year punt / productive struggle. If you've never heard that term, we're going to explain what that means. What are the pros and cons of that strategy? Maybe a little bit of a hybrid, kind of finding that middle ground between the two. We're going to go over all that. But before we get there, I wanted to take a quick break to just hit our Discord. So if you didn't know, if you're new to the channel, we have a free Discord. There's almost 100 guys in there talking shop all the time. You get a dynasty trade offer. You don't know if you should take it. Throw it in the chat. We'll help you out. You're on the clock. You don't know who you should draft. Throw it in the chat. We'll help you out. We react to breaking news, all kinds of stuff. It's a really fun group of guys. It's completely free. The link will be in our show notes. So definitely check that out. And the Nerd Herd Film Room. That's the one other thing I want to hit for you guys. So we do all of our tape study on dynastynerds.com when we're studying incoming rookies. And you can use promo code COOP for 15% off. It's a great resource. So dynastynerds.com, promo code COOP. And with that in the books, let's get into kind of the next section of our show here, Jackson. And I'm excited to dig into some of these popular startup draft strategies that a new player might want to try for themselves. And why don't you start with the first one, which I think will probably be the most familiar, what they're most used to as a new player.
Yeah, so if you're a redraft player, like Cooper said, this is going to be the one that you're at least most familiar with. It's called the win now strategy or the contender strategy. So the goal of this strategy is exactly what it sounds like, right? It's to win now. You're drafting guys that are maybe getting close to that age cliff, guys that are a little older but are productive, right? You're foregoing some of those younger, 22, 23, 24-year-old players and in search of those guys that can put up a bunch of points and are going to win you championships now. Often, some of these guys, some of these dynasty players, we're too quick to write off an older player because we think, oh, they're just going to fall off the cliff and they're not going to have any trade value. We're not going to be able to get anything. We're going to be left holding the bag, essentially, right? Well, some of these players, and we talked about it last week, Travis Kelce, right? We've been thinking for 3 or 4 years now that Travis Kelce is going to fall off the cliff, and he's held on for 3 or 4 years. So guys like that are being overlooked because people think they're about to retire and that they can win you championships now and they can get you that money now. The cons about that is exactly what it sounds like, right? You can be left holding the bag. It's like buying a used car, right? There's going to be some problems with it. It's going to have some maintenance issues. And we never know when those guys are going to fall off the cliff. But overall, man, I really like this win now strategy. The goal of Dynasty, right, is to win money. It's to win a championship. It's to get more money out of it than you're putting into it. So if that's the strategy that you want to go with, if you're looking for a quick payoff, I mean, this contender win now strategy is a great strategy to go with because a lot of these guys are just underappreciated in value, and you can compete for, at least two years, if not maybe 3, depending on who some of these guys you get and where their retirement cliff is at.
Yep, that's right. So I'll give 2 examples of this. So if you're on the clock, I'm looking at ADP right now. So you're picking in the 16, 17 range. 2 guys going back to back in ADP: Christian McCaffrey, Breece Hall. Now, personally, I'm taking Breece Hall there because I think he can be extremely productive. But let's say Breece Hall, he does go in that range, but Christian McCaffrey falls an extra round because everybody is thinking, I don't want to take the 28-year-old running back with my second round startup pick. Well, now you can scoop up the value on Christian McCaffrey and get a player that's probably even going to be more productive than Breece Hall a round later. But, again, keeping in mind that now you've just drafted a 28-year-old running back that is a rapidly depreciating asset. The floor could fall out from under his value at any given moment if he gets hurt. Let's say he has a season-ending injury. Now, not only are you probably not contending for a championship, but you also have this asset that nobody wants to trade for. His value is tanked. Another example, just a few picks later, pick 26 in ADP, Tyreek Hill. Pick 27 in ADP, Malik Neighbors. Contender win now strategy. You're like, heck yeah, give me Tyreek Hill. Give me the guy that was the wide receiver 1 last year and a massive difference maker and can win me my league. And that may very well happen. And Tyreek Hill could also retire after this season, whereas Malik Neighbors is a rookie, and you're going to probably have him on your team for a decade. So, but what if Tyreek Hill doesn't retire? What if you get 3 to 4 more good years out of Tyreek Hill? He could be a steal right there, and he could win you your league. And so this is the contender strategy: is you're going to take the Christian McCaffrey, you're going to take the Tyreek Hill, you're going to take the Travis Kelce, and if you do this, like, you could scoop up really good value because other people are fading those players. They're being ageist. And you could run away with your league where nobody even has a shot to compete with you because you've got literally the number 1 player at every position. You could do that in a dynasty startup draft. But you just got to know, it's like buying a car. Half its value is gone the second you drive it off the lot, right? It is a heavily depreciating asset. And if things don't go as planned, you go this full contender build, you get a couple big injuries, something happens, all of a sudden now you're not competing, and you've got a team that nobody wants to trade for any of your players, and you're kind of stuck holding the bag. So that is the contender / win now strategy in a nutshell. You got anything you'd add to that, Jackson?
Yeah, I would just say it really depends on what you're looking at. Because I mean, these guys, yes, they could retire in a year. Yes, injuries are happening. I never want to go into a startup draft thinking, oh, what if this guy gets injured, right? That's too That's too much of an anomaly. You can't predict these things. I would say go back to our tips, right? Draft for value, not for need, and stay flexible. If you see the board falling to you in this way and you go, hey, like Christian McCaffrey sliding a few rounds, Tyreek Hill sliding a few rounds, Travis Kelce is going like 7, 8 round. I mean, and the value's there. Hey, guess what? Go for the championship now, right? Win some money. It all goes back to what we talked about earlier, just staying flexible.
Yeah, that's right. And chances are it's not just going to be a 1-year rental. Most of these guys that were mentioned. Now, if you let's say you take this to the extreme, multiple rounds later, now you got a guy like Derrick Henry that's pushing 30. He might be a 1-year rental. But a lot of these guys that we're talking about, people assume that they're going to be 1 year because you don't want to bet on the long term. But you actually could end up getting 2 or 3 years out of these guys. And so if you go with this contender build, the idea is not just, hey, I'm going to contend for 1 year and then tank. The idea is to have like a 3-year contending window. So that is the hope, is that for the first 3 years of the league, you are the dynasty, right? If you're going with this strategy. But yeah, like he said, stay flexible, take the value as it falls. And I don't like predicting injury either, but you just got to be aware that particularly with older players, that injury could absolutely crater their value. Like if Breece Hall gets injured, he's still 23, 24 years old. Nobody's worried about it. He'll be fine. Christian McCaffrey gets injured, it's like, oh no, his career might be over. So that's where you have to keep that in mind. So let's move on to the next strategy here. And this is kind of the opposite approach. So the first year punt / productive struggle. A lot of new dynasty players have probably never heard that term, productive struggle. What does that mean? What is this strategy? How does it work, Jackson?
Yeah, so this strategy is essentially you're going into your draft anticipating that you're not going to compete year one. So what you're doing in your startup draft is let's say you have a first round pick, and you know what? I'm going to trade that first round pick for a third round startup pick and a first and second round rookie draft pick. So what you're doing is you're trading back in your startup draft and accumulating assets for the future, whether that be future draft capital or whether that be younger unproven players. So the idea of this strategy is if things go right, if you draft the right guys, if the guys that are expected to take a leap forward and really jump forward in their value after the season, if you get all those guys, you could build a true dynasty, right? With lots of elite assets for 5, 6, 7, maybe even 10 years, depending on the position. For an example, I think about one of my leagues that I was in, and I took this approach. I ended up with guys like Justin Jefferson, Amon-Ra St. Brown, C.J. Stroud, Justin Herbert. I mean, all of these guys, Deebo Samuel, all on the same team because I traded back and acquired future assets, and I was able to hit on those rookie drafts. The con is it takes a lot of patience, right? You have to be in a league that is, one, willing to trade. If the league isn't willing to trade, you're not going to get very far with this startup draft strategy. And you got to be able to draft young guys that are able to turn it up and compete and be a great value in the NFL. If you can't hit on those rookie draft picks, then you're stuck being a team that's perennially on the bottom of your league every single year, and you're just paying into the league fee so that other people can take home money for a championship. So those are kind of the two sides of it. But if you can nail these guys, if you can unbiased plug here, buy our rookie guide and see all the guys that you need to draft and you hit on them, then you are set up for years, and you can truly compete for a dynasty, for a championship for the next 5 to 7 years, if not even longer.
Yeah, that's right. So, for example, let's go back to the ADP draft board. I want to put legs to this thing. So let's say you're picking at the 101 and you got your choice of Patrick Mahomes or Josh Allen. And somebody hits you up and says, hey, I'd like to trade up, which this is one of the great things about Dynasty is you're doing a slow draft with 8 hours on the clock, and you can wheel and deal and trade forward and trade backward in the draft, pick up future assets, that type of thing. So let's say that you're sitting there at 101 and somebody says, hey, I'll send you, or what would it take to get up to 101? And you say, hey, could I get 108 plus your 2025 first and second? And they're like, okay, sure. I'm getting a cornerstone dynasty player. I'll take that trade. Well, now you probably can get a really good, really young player in Joe Burrow or Anthony Richardson, or Caleb Williams. Still probably a cornerstone dynasty asset, and you've just added that future draft capital. Now you'd rinse and repeat and do that process a few more times. Potentially, you're looking at, say you've got 5 out of the 12 first-round picks next year, and a couple of them are really high. And you're going to get a chance to draft some cornerstone players in your startup draft, but also some cornerstone players in your rookie draft next year. And there's more risk in this strategy, and you do need league mates, like you said, that are willing to trade. It also means that when you are, let's say you're on the clock, nobody's interested in trading up. You just got to stay put and make the pick. And you're looking at that same decision of Tyreek Hill or Malik Neighbors. You're for sure going Malik Neighbors there. Like, that's what you're doing. It might lead you to take a player that you think might not produce as much in year one, but you love their long-term outlook. So, for example, last year, if you were going to take a Kyle Pitts or a Drake London I don't believe in Desmond Ridder. I don't think they're going to produce the way that I would want them to this year, but I'm not worried about this year. I'm playing for the long term. Or even like a Justin Herbert this year. I think he's super talented, but the situation, a lot of people are really worried about the situation with Greg Roman and the run-heavy offense and the whole thing, and no wide receivers. But so that would be a great, if you're doing a first-year punt, you want to take a guy like Justin Herbert, still super young, super talented. And so you're giving yourself a great shot at the number 1 pick in next year's rookie draft. You're accumulating other people's draft assets, and you're getting a bunch of young, talented players in the startup. And if everything works out, ideally, that's where, like you said, Jackson, you could end up with that. I've got Stroud and Jefferson and Chase, and it's like my team is loaded. How did you possibly put that team together? You're going to be winning this league for the next 6 years.
Yeah.
It's because you did this strategy and you did it well. So there's a lot of upside, but there's a lot of downside too. So
I will say something you want to make sure if you're doing this strategy, you do not ever, under any circumstance, trade away your first round pick. I've seen too many guys in this scenario that's like, well, I'm going to get all these other picks, but I'm going to trade my pick because it's a high pick, and I'm going to get a package of younger players. No, you keep your pick because you anticipate that pick being the number 1 overall pick in next year's draft. And too often I've seen guys get rid of their first round picks, and that ruins the entire build.
Yep. And in this scenario, you only trade down, you don't trade up, and you don't draft anybody over the age of 26 under any circumstances, if this is your strategy. So again, these are the 2 extremes. Now I want to talk about our third one that we're going to discuss tonight is kind of more play in the middle ground. We'll call this the hybrid strategy. And so what this is basically a balanced approach between the 2 that we just talked about. You're trying to build a good young core with younger players. Probably in your first 5 or 6 rounds, you're not going to draft anybody over the age of 25. But later on, you start to see guys like Keenan Allen, Derrick Henry, Joe Mixon falling in the draft. And you're like, hey, I can scoop these guys up around my young core and give my team a shot to contend in the first year while also having a really good young core. You might trade back a little bit in this scenario, but if you're trading, instead of it being, hey, let me get your 2025 first to trade back, it might be more like, hey, can I get, if I'm going to send you my first to move all the way back, say I'm at 101 and I'm moving all the way back to 108. Well, I want your third for my 5th. So you're going to get a first and a third. They're going to get a first and a 5th. And you're going to get, you're still trying to like build a good team for this year with a lot of youth on it as well. And this is the hybrid. You're playing the middle ground. You want to give yourself